Hey guys, welcome to this week's podcast episode. I've got a really fantastic guest for you today, Kim Rozdeba. I hope I pronounced that correctly, but please correct me if I'm wrong. And today is going to be talking all about branding, your personal face. We're going to talk about difference between personal brand versus resume writing, and I'm happy to welcome Kim to the show. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Christopher. I really look forward to having this conversation with you.
Yeah, so you're actually a branding guru, you're an author, speaker, you've got a blog, so much, and kind of s- set the stage, talk about your experience, background, and how you came to be doing what you're doing.
Sure. No, thank you. So I graduated with a business degree in economics, not a necessarily direct route to what I do today. I started in marketing in a large a petroleum company downstream, and I did sales promotions, did advertising, and I really enjoyed the communication aspect and brand. So I actually went from client side to agency side. I worked for Ogilvy, one of the world's largest agencies, for about 10 years. I worked on Shell was one of my major clients. Worked with a couple of other Fortune 500 companies as well. Went to a small agency, and then I actually went back to client side as time went on. And brands have been sort of the center piece to everything I've been doing because if I look back, I wish I knew what I knew today when I was helping brands way back when. I have a better understanding of brands today, and they are complex.
Yeah, it's especially with social media coming out and people redefining their personal brands. It's like almost like a new distribution channel. Now we've got AI as well, and we'll talk about a little bit about that. So I love this idea. So kind of talking about, you talk about exploring the 5 C's of branding, which everybody can check out in your book. And with your extensive experience, can you elaborate on these elements and share case study or example where
Yeah,
these were applied?
yeah, no, absolutely. So the 5 C's are really sort of just to help compartmentalize the different components of a brand. But before I get there, I'm going to tell you what I think a brand is, because I think it's hard for people to understand what is a brand. And I'd love to get into the conversation about personal brand versus, a box of cereal. They're different. They're not the same. But for me, a brand isn't about what it says or does, but how it makes its customers feel. It
Uh,
sounds very similar to a very famous quote by Maya Angelou, but it is about how it makes the consumer feel. So they own the brand. You can influence it, absolutely. And that's where the 5 C's comes into it. But they own it. They're the ones, the receivers, and they're the ones that determine what your brand is. So the 5 C's really starts with commitment. So commitment is the why. Why does this brand exist today? It's your vision, it's your purpose, it's your promise. What is your promise to your customer? What can they expect every time they interact with your brand? The second one is the construct. Now, this is the easy one. Most people understand. It's the logo, it's the name of the brand, it's the tonality, it's the color palette, it's all the components that make and feel this brand.
yeah.
The third one is your community. And some people say, I thought it was going to be customer. Yeah, customer is part of your community, but your community is much bigger than just your customer. It's your employees, it is your stakeholders, it's your influencers. Hugely important when you're starting a brand to have influencers, because they can amplify what your brand represents. And then the next one, the fourth one, is content. And this is kind of all the marketing aspects of branding. So it's all the touch points. It's everything from a sign in the window of your outlet, if you've got a sign or you got an outlet. It's walking in to the waiting area. all of these are signals of your brand and communications. It's the advertising, if you do advertising, it's the public relations, it's the influencers. Again, how do they communicate and what are you giving them to help amplify? So it is all that content that makes the brand actually live. And then the final one, I think this one here, this is the one that I think is probably the boringest, but it's probably the most important one. And that's consistency. And consistency is all about how do you deliver your promise every time, everywhere? So if you're a brand that's, an international brand, let's say Starbucks, you go into a Starbucks in Athens, Greece, or you go to a Starbucks in Seattle, Washington, you're going to have the same experience. Now, there may be things that might be different on the menu, but you'll have the core items and that experience will be identical. How does that happen? There's a whole bunch of things that have to happen behind the scenes. There's the governance, there is the training, there is the policies, there is an SOP attached to something. There is a supply network to ensure that quality is the same everywhere. So that one is probably the most important one. And it's the one that I have most time struggling with because the other ones are far more interesting.
Yeah. I love that. So I love this idea. You also talk about this differentiating between a resume and a personal brand, and especially highlight that in today's digital age. Is it better to have a personal brand or have a strong resume? People looking to jump ship, change careers, switch jobs, etc.
So I think we kind of misuse branding when we say personal brand. Absolutely, we need to have an identity. And an identity could be brand. And I'm not going to quibble whether it's a brand or not a brand. But, you look at a box of cereal and that's not a human being. And I love the quote that's out there is that brands are trying to become more human and humans are trying to become more like brands. And there's a middle way there, because when you look at a box of cereal, it has been well crafted in all the elements, everything that's in that. So that consistency of what is in there, the product ingredients, to the outside, to the design, to the packaging, how all that happens. And it is, it's a lot of construct that's taking place there. A human being is far more complex. Our personalities are multidimensional. The personality of a brand is pretty fixed. It's not, you're not going to spend a whole evening talking to a brand. It's going to be rather boring because you're going to know exactly what they're going to say. Whereas a human being, you're not sure, depending if you've been drinking wine, their personality is going to shift and change. That's a human being. So while we want to be constructed into a brand, and they're not to say that we can't, it's just, let's be careful that we're not trying to be a box of cereal, because as a human, we want to interact with humans. And there's many elements to that. So sure, you can do some construct, you can have a look of your brand, you can have a name to your brand, you can have certain elements that make it feel that it's you. There's a personality, if I came into your house, Christopher, and you came to mine, they'd go, oh yeah, that kind of fits your personality, right? Yeah. A color palette, but understand that you can't be so fixed. And that's what you're seeing with some famous people. Or, when you become famous, then you can become a brand and you utilize that fame to sell products. And that gets into trouble if your brand, you're not sticking to the brand metrics that you've defined up front. Oprah Winfrey is a really good example of a brand where she knows, there's a great video on YouTube where she talks about her becoming a brand. And she said, you know what, I said I was not a brand for many, many years until she understood what a brand was. And one of the key elements that she understood was the consistency. And when she understood that, she goes, well, I am consistent, so therefore I must be a brand. And so she did actually finally realize that she was a brand. But we see only pieces of her life. We only see pieces of what she wants to show us because the rest is her own personal. And so, she's on when she's on, and she's not there when she's actually being a human being. Because Queen Elizabeth II, another wonderful example of being a brand. She was a brand. Her face was on, currencies. Her face was on stamps. But we only saw a piece of that person when she came out, in her bright yellow or bright blue outfit with the hat and purse, and we recognized exactly that would be her. But we only saw a glimpse because what we saw was the brand.
Yeah.
And I don't think people want to live that life. So a resume is, I think a good starting point because it represents who you are from a business perspective. And if you can put your business hat on and go, okay, this is my brand, and then you walk away from that, I think that's a good way to actually approach it. But today, there's this expectation that you're a brand all the time when you're a personal brand. You've got influencers out there that are trying to create this image, and it's really hard for them to stay in character.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And so in today's age, is it better to have in what context would be better to have a resume versus a personal brand? Or, I know, consumption habits are changing, we've got social media, AI. So, what are your thoughts?
So if you are representing an organization or a business, so you're a doctor, you're a lawyer, a dentist, you probably should have a brand, but it doesn't have to be so in depth. When I go across the 5 C's, that you have to touch all 5 C's to a depth that you would, like a box of cereal would have. But you should have components. You should know why you're there. You should know what's your why. You should have your elevator speech, your 1 minute. Who are you? Why is this important to you? Why should you work with me? And then you should have some other elements. But if you're just working for an organization and you're a career person, I think a resume is probably pretty good. But social media also drives you to want to have some sort of a brand, some sort of, what do you look like? And so there are elements that you can pull in there from a branding perspective, but you don't have to build a following. You don't have to be a leader. I think of a physician and go, how important is a brand for a physician? You've got a clientele that comes in. You've got what, 2,000, maybe 3,000 patients. I don't know if you've got to have a huge presence in social. It doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah. In kind of to add on to that idea, I want to talk about social media and AI, but kind of to talk about, because I know a lot of physicians, for example, they built robust practices, they're top surgeons or, internists or whatever. And then 2020 hits and all the hospitals shut down. What do you do then when you don't have a personal brand?
Well, even with a personal brand, I'm not sure if the hospital is down, you can still practice. You need a place to practice. We saw this with lots of different industries, right? Where people weren't able to do their practice. So good thing is we're back in the world, and that's not necessarily the case today, but you need a following. Absolutely. You need customers, but customers aren't necessarily brand driven in the sense of you start a relationship. Go back to how do I make you feel? It is of those softer points. Absolutely, the product that you're going to be delivering has to be the best product ever. If you're helping somebody get better, then you're helping them get better. You're giving them solutions to help them with their lives. These are really important solutions that you're helping. So on that front, are you going to be advertising? No, I don't think you're going to be. Word of mouth is still so important. It is the most highly used influencing tool in the world. Now, it's now become, from a social perspective. So we all get rated. Dentists gets rated. Physicians get rated. Authors get rated, books get rated. we live by these things, and we live by them because we have a value and our commitment. So you go off of our commitment, our promise. If we deliver on our promise, I don't think you have to worry about your reviews.
Yeah. 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 I love that. Moving on, this idea of how has, personal branding changed in the era of social media and AI now? What is it? Is it amplified it? I'm kind of curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. So social media, I mean, I can go dark pretty quick here and say that social media is the driver of personal branding. And the reason I say that is it is something that they would love because this is content. They want everyone to actually push out content. They want everyone to create an image online, i.e. write, comments, write articles, put videos, TikTok. These are all channels that need content. And if you're building a brand, guess what? How do you build a brand? Through content. It's not just your name. It's not just the color palette. You've got to actually put content in there. And the content has to be consistent. So I don't know. I sometimes wonder, who's driving whom as to the need here. Again, I'm a conspiracist in this, but I go to AI. AI is there as a tool to help. I mean, I don't know about you, but sometimes I go, I don't feel like posting something today. But you look at the algorithms and you got to keep feeding it. If you don't keep feeding it, then your stuff's not going to get pushed out. And you're not going to get the eyeballs that you need. And you now get addicted to the eyeballs. And how many eyeballs did you get on this particular post? AI is helpful. It can actually repurpose content. So quickly you can put content in and go, hey, I want you to post this, write this as a Facebook. I want you to write this as a LinkedIn. And I want you to write another piece from an Instagram perspective. It can even take and develop images as well. But yeah, I use it in those cases where I just, I'm not up for writing another post. Do I take the entire thing that they write? No, because usually it's not in my language the way I would write it. But it gets me started. It gets me started to say, oh, okay, that's an interesting way of putting that point across. I'll take a little piece of it and embellish it.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And it's just basically it's amplified everybody, it's given everybody a mic, and you can go onto the town hall and just broadcast your message. And with AI now you can scale that, which is really interesting. So kind of I want to kind of focus on this. Your book, you got a Branding Queens book, which everybody should check out on Amazon, and you focus on women who built global brand dynasty. You kind of mentioned some of them, Oprah and all these. What unique strengths and traits have you found that women bring to the table in brand building, and how do these differ from traditional approaches?
Great question, Christopher. Thank you very much. I'm going to use another quote that, and again, I don't know where it came from, but I will build it and they will come. This is a quote where a lot of brands, that's how they started. I'm going to build something and they will come. What I saw in these 20 women was they built something because there was a problem that they saw. And generally, they saw problems they were the customer just as much as the customers that they were selling to. And so they saw problems that solved for them, but also solved for other women. So what's interesting there is that they continue to solve problems for their customers right away. Whereas a lot of products started with not solving a product, they developed a new idea, a new way of doing things. I would say Apple with the iPad or with the iPod. Did it solve a problem? Eventually it did, but there was no problem at the time. It was a new evolution, a new innovation. But what I saw in these 20 women was empathy. If building a brand is about making your customers feel something, empathy becomes really important. And if you start with empathy, you're already building a strong relationship with your customer. So that's the first thing I saw. The second thing I saw was a lot of these women had no formal education. So they were taking on not only building a product and making the best product possible in the marketplace, because they were, in most cases, they were perfectionists. And they were building these products, and they had to build a network. They had to learn everything from ground zero. And what I mean by everything from, how to sell a product, how to actually build a product, how to distribute the product, how to market it, how to grow it, how to finance it. So they were learners because they had to learn so much. And they were listeners because they had to learn so much. And they also learned from the customer. And they went and they built their brand one customer at a time. A lot of cases, these women would be out there. Estee Lauder, for example, she would always be out on the floor, your cosmetic floor, first floor in the department store, would have, all of her cosmetics there, but she would be out on the floor, either spraying a product to create, the smell to get people's attention, women's attention. She'd be out there with samples. She was the first to come up with free samples. That changed the industry because, if you get a sample of something, it helps you. It converts you much quicker than somebody trying to explain to you what the change is going to be. You can actually feel it or taste it. Taste is great too. If you're doing like Mrs. Fields cookies, she used to be notorious for giving out free cookies. Yeah. Same thing. But it is this relationship with customers and learning from customers so that they can make the product better. Those are just a couple. There's a couple others.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. Which is really that. Then kind of to close it out is as a kind of talk about as an indie author, most surprising challenges you face with writing your nonfiction book, and then also advice for aspiring brand builders, for people just starting out on their journey. What's the most crucial piece of advice you have, and what mistakes to avoid?
Well, I've never written a book before. It took me 3 years. I didn't know it was actually a book when I started. I thought it was just another blog that I was writing, and then it got away from me, and I had to actually Google to find out how many words are in a book. And I was at 40,000 at that time, and then the book actually ended up at 66,000. Learning, and again, I go back to what I learned from these women. First of all, I became an indie author because I saw these women struggle and build from ground zero. They wanted total control of what they were building. So I followed that same principle of why I published my own book. And so I had to learn. I had to learn a lot. And I knew nothing, but I had to try. And I tried, and I eventually you also have to start with your principles as to what, you think is right as well. So that's how I published my book. I learned a lot. I'm actually writing a second book. I will know more now on how to get this book published much quicker than my first. And then on your final question as to if you're starting out, what's really interesting is don't be hard on yourself. Mm-hmm. You're not going to know why. You're not going to know your vision of your brand right away. You're too busy building whatever you're going to service your customer with. You're going to have to come up with a model of how you're going to service your customer. You're going to try and be unique in some way, either offering something different than your competitors. You've got to make sure your product is delivered every time to the best of your ability and quality. By doing all that, you're not thinking about brands. You're not thinking about branding. You're just trying to execute and make sure that the customer is going to be happy. The brand will come. Okay, you need a name, yes. You need, some sort of parameters from a construct perspective, but don't be hard on yourself. As to your customer as well, you may define a customer, but you may see actually somebody different coming into your door. And you define something totally different. But I saw a similar in my book. I thought my book was for people that were into branding. I found that a lot of people that are reading my book are entrepreneurs, in particular women entrepreneurs. So you will go in with a hypothesis, but you will come out with better learnings as long as you're listening and watching. So listen, watch, and your brand will come to you. But to think that you're going to craft it all at the beginning, I mean, you can see lots of famous brands out there that have changed over the years. They've changed their logos, but in a couple of years, some change their logos. They change their name. They take they try to put a descriptor on the name, and then they decide, oh, you know what, that descriptor is narrowing my opportunity. I'm going to take that descriptor off. You may have a brand that, you started in English, but now it becomes an international one. How do you transition that? So be flexible and listen to your target audience. They're going to tell you a lot.
Yeah. I love that. A really fascinating discussion. And I really love, you kind of talked to, kind of described what a personal brand is and kind of talked about, the influence of social media, AI. You gave examples. You talked about your book and really a lot of good, great insights. How can people follow you, check out your work, etc.?
So you can follow me on LinkedIn. You can just put in Rozdeba and you'll find me. It's Derrick Kim Rozdeba. My middle name is Derrick. Kim is my first name. So you can find me there at LinkedIn, or you can also go directly to my website. My website is Rozdeba, ROZDEBA.com. And again, just Google Rozdeba and you'll find me. It's not too hard. There's not a lot of Rozdebas out there.
And for all the audience out there, let's thank Kim for coming on. And like I said, a really fantastic discussion. And be sure to follow him, give him a like on his socials, and check out his book on Amazon. And with that, thanks so much for coming on to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Christopher. I really enjoyed it.